can start reading. We left off, and Rosemary finished off. We showed some pictures last week of the temple. We really got into Solomon's temple discussion of pretty much the outside. Today we're going to talk more about, or we're going to read about the inside of the area, I'm going to show you video of a reconstruction that was done actually a while ago, but the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York did a really cool video study of this model that was done in England about 100 years ago. But it's gorgeous. It's a solid gold, as the description of it has. So we'll take a look at it, and so I think we left off with the part of the description of, hold it, I think pretty much in the outside, where I'm gonna post up where we left off. And again, we went into chapter 6. What we finished with was that a lot of the materials came from Lebanon, especially the wood. The rocks were quarried in Israel. And we talked about the dimensions, which they seem very reasonable. It's not like there's descriptions of this that are hard to fathom or impossible dimensions. And we talked about the fact that and we looked at the outside, that there is I'll just show it real quick. I'll show you the outside picture that we looked at last time. So outside and also cut out of the inside. You can see that there was a main building, and then there was a side building that was 3 stories that were side buildings. This is a little bit more speculative what was on the side buildings, and then the portico was here, the entrance. The inside we'll look at today. We'll look at the descriptions of the inside. And again, there's some things that we have to just kind of imagine, speculate on what it actually looked like. But there was a main building with side buildings that were kind of buttressed the building. And that's what we finished with. And this was the description. So let's continue. I think this is about where we
that looks right.
Yeah. So let's start here.
Okay. When the house was built, only finished stones cut at the quarry were used, so that no hammer or axe or any iron tool was heard in the house while it was being built. The entrance to the middle story of the side chambers was on the right side of the house, and winding stairs led up to the middle chambers, and from the middle chambers to the 3rd story. When he finished building the house, he paneled the house with beams and planks of cedar.
Yeah, so now we're going to get right here is where we start to get into the interior. But it is important to know that the stones were cut at the quarry, and they were cut. They were basically finished before they were brought to the building, which is interesting because that's not necessarily the easiest way to do things. To finish the stones at the quarry means that there was work that was being done. It's much easier to do the work on site to some extent, or to finish the stones on site. But here they're basically saying they didn't do that, so that it kept the noise down and almost created a sense of holiness as they were doing the work. So this is like, they weren't the sounds of jackhammers going off would be the equivalent today. So it was a quieter, more dignified, if you will, work site than you would normally have for this type of construction, where you'd have a lot more raw materials lying around. It basically is saying they didn't do that. So this is kind of interesting. And now we're going to read about like the fact that there was work that was done here too, where just like the Ark of the Covenant, and kind of keeping with that theme, things that you wouldn't see, you wouldn't know the level of craftsmanship, it was still done, as if to say, again, we're not cutting any corners here at all. And even the parts that you'll never see, we're going to make sure are beautiful. So here's an example.
He built the storied structure against the entire house, each story 5 cubits high, so that it encased the house with timbers of cedar. Then the word of the Lord came to Solomon. With regard to this house you are building, if you follow my laws and observe my rules and faithfully keep my commandments, I will fulfill for you the promise that I gave to your father David. I will abide among the children of Israel, and I will never forsake my people Israel.
So God actually comes and speaks to Solomon again. And this time it doesn't say that it's a dream, though it could have been, but it doesn't say that. It says that this building, this house, the temple, if you follow my rules, I will fulfill you the promise. I will abide among the children of Israel, and I will never forsake my people Israel. Now, what's so powerful about this is that in the midst of Solomon building this temple that he thinks is going to be pleasing to God and is going to be great for God, there's this wonderful message that God gives him, which is, you have to still follow my laws. You still have to keep the mitzvot. Don't think, again, maybe you could say the message here is, this is beautiful what you're building for me, but it doesn't get you out of following the Torah. And it's a great message, because it's basically saying, what I really care about is what are you doing? What's your behavior like? And, I will fulfill my promise, not because you're building me this great temple, but because you're doing the right thing. So it doesn't say that God is disappointed with it, but it's also kind of a message of, yeah, but this isn't what I'm asking for.
When Solomon had completed the construction of the house, he paneled the walls of the house on the inside with planks of cedar. He also overlaid the walls on the inside with wood from the floor of the house to the ceiling, and he overlaid the floor of the house with planks of cypress.
Yeah, and this is obviously very expensive wood. This is cedar wood, which is from Lebanon, as we were talking about. Cypress trees are also very expensive and considered to be premium, better wood than maybe some of the other pine or some of the other wood that they could have used. And what's important about this is because much of this is going to be covered, at least in the interiors, with gold, you would never see it. You would never see what kind of wood was on the inside. And again, you have stone, and then after you have the stone kind of like structure, you have the wood paneling. Now, again, you were not going to see the wood paneling. It's not like going into someone's basement back in the 70s and find wood paneling all, cheap wood paneling all along the walls. You're not even going to see it because it's going to be covered in gold.
20 cubits from the rear of the house, he built a partition of cedar planks from the floor to the walls. He furnished its interior to serve as a shrine, as the Holy of Holies. The front part of the house, that is the Great Hall, measured 40 cubits. The interior The cedar of the interior of the house had carvings of gourds and calyxes. It was all cedar. No stone was exposed. In the innermost part of the house, he fixed a shrine in which to place the ark of the Lord's covenant. The interior of the shrine was 20 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 20 cubits high. He overlaid it with solid gold. He similarly overlaid its cedar altar.
Yeah. And so I'm going to show you in a second the video of, let's read it first and then we'll show the video. So 20 cubits by 20 cubits by 20 cubits is roughly 30 feet squared or cubed, because you get the dimensions, the height as well. This is, it's a good size, but this is not this is not a ridiculously big building. We found other buildings in Israel that we have identified as sanctuaries because we found shrines, we found the altars, we found incense stands. We found similar dimensions for these shrines and in these temples. Most of what we found, are either square or rectangular formations. That seems to be the style of architecture in ancient Israel. It's not. It's similar to Canaanite structures. It makes sense from a cultural standpoint that this is the kind of architecture and the styles that they used. It is just as the same as we built synagogues in places like, Highland Park or wherever else we lived, LA, that were like churches and like other buildings that we saw that our Gentile neighbors were worshiping in. So it doesn't surprise us that these are the dimensions and these are the sizes of the places, but all of this is very reasonable. It is, as you're seeing right now, it's overlaid in solid gold, which is very, very expensive, and it's very, it must have been amazing to see. Again, the wood, you have stone on the outside, you have wood, and then you have the gold on it. There are two rooms that we're going to show right now, or in a moment. There is a main hall, the main hall, the house, as it's translated here, and then you have the Holy of Holies. So there's two rooms that you go into, or you could go into. We don't go into the Holy of Holies, but there are two rooms in the temple. That is also very similar to some of the shrines that we found in ancient Israel and in Lebanon and in that region. There would be a shrine and then an inner shrine. It's not uncommon. So again, we'll take a look at the video of this. Judith reminds us that one of the things we did not mention was how the stones were cut. Now, it is important to say that there were no tools used on the stones. It says while it was, let's go back right here. There was no stones, or they were cut in the quarry, and no hammer was used on the stones. And that goes back to the fact that it says in Exodus that you're not supposed to use any metal to cut the stone. That's at least for what you were supposed to do for the shrine. The idea that you didn't use it to do any of the stones for the temple, it's not exactly what it says here. It says the stones were cut in the quarry, and no hammer or iron tool was heard in the house while it was being built. The rabbis kind of conflated the earlier part of Exodus with this to say basically that no stones used in the temple at all were cut. Look, part of that is so that no iron tool, nothing made of metal, no hammer, nothing that would have possibly been used to kill somebody would ever have been used to create some part of the Holy Temple. People didn't like that idea. You can kind of get that, right? You understand. If something is being used for the service of God and to create peace and to have, to have a holy, pure place, it shouldn't have been used to stab somebody with. And of course, implements in the ancient world, something that was made out of iron would oftentimes be repurposed. That's why we say, turn our spears into pruning hooks, right? Our swords should be turned into plowshares because the same metal would be reused, hopefully during peacetime. You could repurpose this stuff. The modern equivalent today is a military budget, that you have so much money to spend in your government budget. Where are you going to spend it on the military? Or are you going to spend it on building roads and bridges and helping to get better safety and food, products to people? You have to prioritize it, right? So in the ancient world, this was very real because the same stuff would be used. So there's a wonderful midrash that because Solomon could speak to anything, he could also speak to this very wondrous creature called the shamir. We don't really have a basis for this other than the legend, the midrash of it, which the shamir was a worm-like creature that would eat through, that could cut through stone. And according to the midrash, Solomon would speak to the shamir and have the shamir cut out the stones so that people never had to cut them off. They never had to quarry them. They never had to, cut them out of the ground. The shamir did it because otherwise you need to have an iron tool. So that's the wonderful thing about the shamir, is it allowed for this iron not to have to be used for the temple. But it all goes back to, again, the fact that the same hammers, the same blades that were used to make the temple could have been used in battle. And I guess to some extent, you don't want something that was used for this, even if they took new iron tools, you wouldn't want to use them later on to kill somebody with either. So you never would want those blades to be used before or after they've been used to make the holy temple. So it's an interesting midrash based again on this idea that we didn't want to use anything that would be could kill somebody, could be used, to take life. All right, so let's continue on with the description of.
Yeah, I think we read that part.
Yep, we are right about here.
I think we're right there. Solomon overlaid. Solomon overlaid the interior of the house with solid gold, and he inserted golden chains into the door of the shrine. He overlaid the shrine with gold so that the entire house was overlaid with gold. He even overlaid with gold the entire altar of the shrine, and so the entire house was completed. In the shrine, he made 2 cherubim of olive wood, each 10 cubits high. One had a wing measuring 5 cubits and another wing measuring 5 cubits, so that the spread from wingtip to wingtip was 10 cubits. And the wing spread of the other cherub was also 10 cubits. The 2 cherubim had the same measurements and proportions. The height of the one cherub was 10 cubits, and so was that of the other cherub.
Yeah, because otherwise that would have looked kind of funky if they were different heights. But they have.
Although, when you're making stuff by hand, to make two things that look exactly alike, it's really hard.
It is. So let's look at this, because once we finish this description, we're going to take a look at them.
He placed the cherubim inside the inner chamber. Since the wings of the cherubim were extended, a wing of the one touched one wall and a wing of the other touched the other wall, while their wings in the center of the chamber touched each other. He overlaid the cherubim with gold. All over the walls of the house, of both the inner area and the outer area, he carved reliefs of cherubim, palms, and calyxes, and he overlaid the floor of the house with gold, both the inner and the outer areas. Okay, so I'm gonna show you this now before we get further, because we'll finish this chapter and then we'll I can't wait to show it to you, but we'll wait. Okay. For the entrance of the shrine, he made doors of olive wood, the pilasters and the doorposts having 5 sides. The double doors were of olive wood, and on them he carved reliefs of cherubim, palms, and calyxes. He overlaid them with gold, hammering the gold onto the cherubim and the palms. For the entrance of the great hall, too, he made doorposts of oleaster wood, having 4 sides, and the double doors of cypress wood, each door consisting of 2 rounded planks. On them he carved cherubim, palms, and calyxes, overlaying them with gold applied evenly over the carvings. He built the inner enclosure of 3 courses of hewn stones and 1 course of cedar beams. In the 4th year, in the month of Ziv, the foundations of the house of the Lord were laid.
Yeah. So, let's take a look at what this looks like, because these are again descriptions of the walls, the gold, those kind of things. We haven't gotten into some of the other inner details, but let's take a look at this. Hold on one second. And the month of Ziv is the month in springtime today that we would call the month of Iyar. So it's usually like April, May. So again, this is what it looked like roughly from the cutout. And now we're going to go inside to it. And this is a slightly different model. This model, as I said, that I'm about to show you the video of, was done. It's a miniature model done by a British scholar a long time ago. So here's this version of it, though. First, you can see here the Kruvim are these composite beasts. We usually, again, think of them as little angels, but they're not. They're wings, and they are big because they're, as you heard, they're 10 cubits high, so it's about 15 feet, about not quite 3 times the size of a human being, but pretty big, pretty impressive, especially given that they're covered in gold. And underneath it, you see the ark. So the ark was underneath it, and of course, the ark had Kruvim on it too. Now, it also says along the walls were Kruvim. And again, this is kind of where we have to speculate how they looked. But we do have similar temples that we found that have these kinds of patterns. So we found the Kruvim. We actually found an amazing version of this, if you will, inside Israel itself, when we found the temple in Samaria, the palace in Samaria of King Ahab. And we have this palace in Samaria that is from the Omrid dynasty, that was it was the northern kingdom after it revolted against Solomon. And we found Kruvim that were carved in ivory, which the Bible actually describes this palace, and we found pieces of it. And it was carved in ivory, which is very expensive, obviously, even then, or now, whenever, it's super expensive. And it was carved in ivory, and it's these kruvim, it's these composite beasts, which again you can see part man, part bird, and part lion or bull, or both. And then we also have these calyxes. We have these palms and this floral pattern, which it also describes. So when it comes to this, we really are going to see kind of a different speculation about what those look like. But here's a video that I'm going to put up, which is as I said, this was from the Met. This was designed, as you can see, almost 150 years ago, by Thomas Newberry. So let's take a look at this. Hopefully, let me just make sure I can optimize it. So this is going into the Holy of Holies from the outer shrine into the inner shrine.
Wasn't there a curtain?
Yes. So
you wouldn't have seen it if you were.
You wouldn't have seen it from the outside, correct. So this is kind of without the curtains. This is somewhat speculative what the ceiling looked like, whether it was curved or flat. You'll see different versions of it. This is one that obviously has more of a rounded dome. The sides seem to be a little bit more.
That's quite an anachronism, a dome.
Yeah. So, yeah, and nobody have.
That'd be very miraculous if it had a dome.
Yes, and so, this was a British, a British design, which again maybe was more, informed by Thomas Wren, not necessarily by what was really going on. But I thought the interesting depiction here was the kruvim, which actually, you don't usually see multiple wings on them, but that's what it described them as. Now, this is also combining the Ezekiel vision where they have different faces, right? So you have a face of a man, you have a face of a lion, the face of the eagle, the face of the bull. So you have these different faces here on the kruvim. So this is kind of a combination of the Ezekiel vision with that. And but the idea of having multiple wings seems as though that's what it says. But I also want to, what's nice about this model is that it also gives you, because it was made, it was constructed, actually, it's not a 3D representation. No, the 3D representations are also interesting. This actually gives you more of an idea of what it would actually look like, how it would kind of pop. Now, remember, this is a very small representation, but you do get to see like what the effect of having all this gold and how it could possibly have looked as far as the overlays. I mean, again, these are his interpretation of what the kruvim look like, but I think it's substantial in that, again, you get to see kind of how light would reflect off of this gold, which again, I don't know that you can get from a 3D representation. So that gives you a little bit of an idea. And again, this is a miniature. So the only way that they could do this was to literally create, to be able to have the cameras that you could put into a miniature and kind of, put through the miniature. But it's amazing. It's an amazing construction. And again, it was made about 140 years ago. So that's pretty amazing. Now we'll talk a little bit about those things that we saw. I just couldn't wait to share that with you because it was, this is the outer stuff, but, we didn't finish this last line, sorry.
In the 4th year, in the month of Ziv, the foundations of the house of the Lord were laid. And in the 11th year, in the month of Bul, that is the 8th month, the house was completed according to all its details and all its specifications. It took him 7 years to build it.
Yeah, so this is...
and it went exactly according to plan, which is another miracle.
the contractor, he didn't have to kill any of the contractors. It doesn't actually say he didn't.
They didn't have that 10% overage.
It doesn't say whether they met their budget or not.
That's true. But it is a long time. The construction of this, and I think, what
cathedrals took hundreds of years.
Yes, and what I think is possible is that it really did take 7 years. I don't think that's an exaggeration. I think it's a reporting of what really happened. And people really said, yeah, it took 7 years for this construction to happen. It's not unrealistic based on the dimensions. And
they were still putting fixtures in the bathrooms.
But it also means, again, that people, people who saw it, the start of it, maybe weren't around for when it got finished. But yes, as Judith said, there were cathedrals that took hundreds of years to build. And in some cases, the legacy, the way that passed on from one generation to another was, must have been pretty amazing to think about having that responsibility passed
there was
on.
I don't know if they ever finished it, but there's a cathedral in Bernathen, Pennsylvania, that they were building using the original traditional methods. And it was taking, decades. I don't know if they ever finished it, but it was really cool.
Interesting. Well, a few years ago, they turned Ken Follett's book, The Pillars of the Earth, into a movie, into a miniseries. The miniseries was not great, but the story, I don't remember if I ever finished the Pillars of the Earth, but it was for people who are fans of British history. When did the miniseries come out? July. 12 years ago. It was out 12 years ago. Wow. Yeah. So anyways, yes, it would take years sometimes for these cathedrals to be built. And you look, this isn't as massive and as high as those cathedrals were, but it is and it also, in some of those cases, there were years that it took so long that there were different architectural styles that got incorporated because, there were, people traveled, they saw what somebody was doing in Spain, they saw what someone was doing in Turkey, and, they incorporated new architectural styles and new architectural, innovations. And so in some cases, things got reworked and, people started putting up, flying buttresses and things like that. And people they changed their plans. Within 7 years, it's not likely that, there were completely new architectural designs that people wanted to incorporate into this temple. But I do think I think this is all, everything that was described here seems fairly legitimate. What's interesting is that later on, when we rebuild the second temple, it takes a very long time. It doesn't seem to be ever as amazing as this temple. And then that second temple gets completely rebuilt by King Herod on dimensions and on in some ways, not with as much gold as this one had, but definitely with architectural requirements and courtyards and a massive infrastructure design that was immense, that makes this construction to some extent look like a Lego set, other than the fact that this was gold, overlaid in gold and in the inside. And
now I'm imagining making a Lego model of the temple. I'm sure somebody's done it.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. But yeah, you need those newer sets with more fine designs, not like the old style Legos. But yeah, this is a very doable construction, and I don't believe it was that there weren't accounts of it as it was being done, which we're getting, I think, those accounts or secondhand accounts not long after. And I believe that, and most people believe, there are not everybody, but many biblical scholars believe that when this was written, this composed, the temple was still standing. And so for people to like speculate or to have to figure this out, or even if they didn't have the information, it wouldn't have been that hard to do. So that's why it's all very conceivable. The idea for why you had to have a shamir, a magical worm, okay, that's one thing. But other than that, there's really no reason to believe that this wasn't the way it went down. But we're going to continue because we've only done the outside, so to speak.
And it took Solomon 13 years to build his palace, until his whole palace was completed. He built the Lebanon forest house with 4 rows of cedar columns and with hewn cedar beams above the columns. Its length was 100 cubits, its breadth 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits.
So this is Solomon's palace. Now it's almost as if this writer wanted to tell you it took 7 years for the temple to be built, but it took 13 years for Solomon's palace to be built. And Solomon's palace is bigger than the temple. Because this is just one of the rooms. The Lebanon forest house was just one of his rooms. It was very impressive. Very impressive, but it's just one part of his complex. So there's a lot of effort put into the temple, but the biblical author wants you to know there was also a lot of effort put into his palace. Let's take a look at some of what was in his palace.
It was paneled with cedar with the planks that were above on the 45 columns, 15 in each row. And there were 3 rows of window frames with 3 tiers of windows facing each other. All of the doorways and doorposts had square frames with 3 tiers of windows facing each other. He made the portico of columns 50 cubits long and 30 cubits wide. The portico was in front of the columns, and there were columns with a canopy in front of them. He made the throne portico, where he was to pronounce judgment, the hall of judgment. It was paneled with cedar from floor to floor. The house that he used as a residence in the rear courtyard, we lost the image here. There it is. The house that he used as a residence in the rear courtyard back of the portico was of the same construction. Solomon also constructed a palace like that portico for the daughter of Pharaoh, whom he had married.
Yeah. So Solomon's palace was, and I will show you a picture of Solomon's palace, was also a breathtaking building. There are less constructions or reimaginings of it, because let's face it, it's not the temple, right? It's not the place that everybody was supposed to worship God in. But it is definitely something that people have speculated, what did it look like? How big was the entire complex? I will show you kind of This is kind of a good overview of what the palace complex looked like. So these buildings here, almost all of these buildings here are all bigger than the temple. So when we're talking about how big, how massive his construction projects were for himself, I will tell you that people, and maybe the reason that you see these kinds of descriptions were to tell us that Solomon definitely was building on a level like he was, a potentate of that era. Just the fact that, we're reminded of the fact that Judith, why don't you share in the chat the Lego construction? Judith found a Lego construction of the temple. So, people, look, was he impressing his own people? Was he impressing people who came from out of town to see this? The reality is that people wanted to, maybe wanted their king to live, at a level that people would have said, our king deserves to have this kind of, or it sends the message to everybody else that our king is at that level. That's, to some extent, there's a level of national pride in that. We have this weird thing. We have this fetish for the White House. And we like the fact that we own it and the president, it's not owned by the president. But, we still look at whoever has the biggest house or has the house that's worth the most, that's a testament to their wealth and to their success and to their power. So it's not inconsistent with that, right? It's almost what you'd expect. So he built these beautiful palaces, and it says that one of the palaces that he in particular built was for Pharaoh's daughter. Now, what's interesting is that he's married to lots of women, but it's almost as if Pharaoh's daughter got a special house to, again, testify to the fact that she's the Pharaoh's daughter. Here's what it says. Let me put it up. Back up.
All these buildings, from foundation to coping and all the way out to the great courtyard, were of choice stones, hewn according to measure, smooth on all sides. The foundations were huge blocks of choice stone, stones of 10 cubits and stones of 8 cubits, and above were choice stones, hewn according to measure, and cedar wood.
Oh, wait. So one thing about this. So the stones, if these stones, some of these choice stones are 10 cubits or 8 cubits even, you're talking about 12, 15 feet long stones. These stones weigh tons. And we do have stones this size that were used in the wall of what we call the Wailing Wall. And these stones are very, very heavy. And they're literally, again, these are seen as testaments to construction and to great, to great power in just making these stones fit into where they were supposed to go. And so the stone itself is a testament. Then you have the wood, which is from Lebanon. And in some cases you have gold. But really, as you're seeing, well, let's keep looking.
The large surrounding courtyard had 3 tiers of hewn stone and a row of cedar beams, the same as for the inner court of the house of the Lord and for the portico of the house. King Solomon sent for Hiram and brought him down from Tyre. He was the son of a widow of the tribe of Naphtali, and his father had been a Tyrian, a coppersmith. He was endowed with skill, ability, and talent for executing all work in bronze. He came to King Solomon and executed all his work.
Yeah, so this is a different Hiram than the king. So Hiram is another, this guy is another Phoenician, and he is like Bezalel, who made the ark and the tabernacle. He is a craftsman, and he is very, very skilled at what he needs to do for especially the metalwork. Now it says that he's part Israelite and part Phoenician. So he's actually the product of an interfaith household. Now, the rabbis have a problem with this to some extent because, what do we do? This guy he's pretty trusted by Solomon. He seems to be a pretty good guy. And what do we do with this guy? And so, to some extent, his father's dead, which I don't know if that makes it easier for them to accept him, but the reality is this is who he is. And maybe, again, he wasn't really raised as a Tyrian. He was raised as an Israelite. The interesting thing about him is he seems to have lived in Tyre. It says that's where he came down from. And he seems to be worth mentioning and worth including in this because he had Tyrian skills. So it's not that he's just accidentally Tyrian. The fact that he's a Jewish Tyrian gives him kind of like an understanding of both worlds. And so this is why he's valuable, but it seems as though his skill is specifically because he's Tyrian. That's the interesting thing. It's not because he's from the tribe of Naphtali that he knows how to do this work. It's because he's Tyrian. So this is all for the palace. Now look, the work, as you can see, is being done with bronze, copper, right? Not as expensive as gold, but still very beautiful and still requires a great level of skill. But there is this understanding that temple is in gold, Solomon's stuff will be in bronze and copper.
He cast 2 columns of bronze. One column was 18 cubits high and measured 12 cubits in circumference, and similarly, the other column. He made 2 capitals cast in bronze to be set upon the 2 columns, the height of each of the 2 capitals being 5 cubits. Also, nets of meshwork with festoons of chainwork for the capitals that were on top of the columns, 7 for each of the 2 capitals.
Yes, there definitely seems to be something very prominent and awe-inspiring with these columns. Look, they were all the way through the Greco-Roman period. Columns were seen as something that, ordinary people didn't have in their homes and palaces in the temple. So there were the two columns out in front in the portico of Solomon's temple. Here there's two capitals, two large columns, but there are other columns as well, right? So, well, we haven't gotten to them yet, but Judith pointed out that construction has not usually been, being handy has not usually been a Jewish trait. I don't want to perpetuate but yes, there is something to be said for that. And I think what's interesting about what Judith just said is that might go for the construction, right? That might go for the overall construction. But I will tell you, well, hold it one second. First, I'm going to show you what Judith texted out to everybody, which is this is the temple. This is the temple done in Lego. It's 5 minutes. We're not going to.
No, can you mute the music too?
Somebody took it very seriously. Yes, I will mute the music. Yeah, so this is done in Lego.
Cool.
I guess this was as they were building it. Here. Yeah, see, it's tough to do.
Yeah.
Not an easy thing. It's not easy.
You'd almost have to make it huge so that you could use the little Legos to make the Kruvim.
Yeah. And then with these capitals, you could see he freehanded it or whatever, whoever did it. So yeah, there you go. That is a Lego construction. Yeah, I mean, seems pretty. 1.5 feet. Height 1.5 feet, length 3 feet. Wow, it's pretty small actually. It's not. I mean, it's big for Legos, but it's not. But back to this issue of doing metalwork, though, in many countries, especially in Arab countries, it was Jews who did most of the jewelry work, the filigree and the metal, metal craftsmanship was pretty much only done by Jews. In some countries, that was because it was considered to be, not really highly valued work, in the sense that it was more manual work, but it was definitely something that Jews did in many of these countries, like Morocco and parts of the Arab world. Jews were known for their metalwork.
Also because they weren't allowed to be in the building unions.
Yeah, but it wasn't just in the Christian countries. It actually almost was more in the Arab countries that the Jews had this reputation for, having this. So in Europe, oftentimes Jews would deal in jewels and deal in, but that was almost more because of the banking and kind of the.
Well, if you were banking, then you had the access to the raw materials.
Yeah, and that's almost why it was there. The actual craftsmanship was very much, though, that was something that in the Arab world, Jews in the Arab world were really well known for. So what's interesting is that as Israel was established, or as Jews, even before Israel was established in the 1800s, as kind of Jews kind of came together from both the East and the West, I would say from Europe and from Jews who lived in Arab world or Asia, Middle East, whatever you want to call it, you almost had two things that were going on simultaneously, which we don't talk about a lot, but I mean, it's an interesting, when it comes to the jewelry business, is that some of the skill was in acquiring diamonds and using those networks for jewels and for diamonds, like you have in Belgium and you have in South Africa. But also part of it was the style and the design. And so what's interesting is that in some cases you had Ashkenazi jewel traders or providers of the stones, and then you had other Jews that were doing the craftsmanship. And so you had both of those kinds of skills, or those traditional family skills being passed on. So some of it was, and even in New York to this day, you have the Diamond District where you'll have, primarily Hasidic, Eastern European Hasidic Jews that are in the business of acquiring and purchasing and selling diamonds, and then you'll have more Syrian or Moroccan Jews that are oftentimes doing the craftsmanship, and they're kind of like, everybody says, well, they're Jews in the jewelry business, but it's not. It's a little bit more complicated than that. And it wasn't just one aspect of it. It was actually different aspects of it that came together, especially in places like New York, but also in Israel and in Europe, where you had both the families who were traditionally in manufacturing and putting these things together, and then also the people who had access to the diamonds themselves, the stones. So it wasn't. I want to make a point that it wasn't that Jews weren't handy. It was also the fact that oftentimes the things that they were handy in were more of the detail-oriented kinds of metallurgy that was used for not necessarily big projects, but more for jewels and for filigree and for ornamental design. All right. So
he made the columns so that there were 2 rows of pomegranates encircling the top of the one network to cover the capitals that were on the top of the pomegranates, and he did the same for the network on the second capital. The capitals upon the columns of the portico were of lily design, 4 cubits high. So also the capitals upon the 2 columns extended above and next to the bulge that was beside the network. There were 200 pomegranates in rows around the top of the second capital.
Yeah, and we've also found some of these pomegranate designs in the temple, I keep saying the temple, in the palace of Samaria. And so we found that pomegranate design as well, the rimonim. So we still use those rimonim. We use that style on the Torah crowns that we use. Oftentimes we'll have rimonim that have the pomegranates either on the tops of the Torah when they're made out of metal, usually silver. They'll use those rimonim pattern, or they'll use rimonim. They'll use the little bells or little metal, the metal kind of hanging designs that go at for different things, including the breastplate. Sometimes we'll have rimonim, which will also, again, be these pomegranate styles that harken back to the palace and to the temple. You can also see that there's a lily design, right? This lily, this Shoshan is lily, Shoshanim are lilies. Lilies are also a pattern that was described as being associated with King David and King Solomon, which is one of the reasons why it's also later on attributed and assigned to Jesus, being a descendant of David. So the lily is a symbol of the Davidic line, and here you see Solomon has lilies in his palace. And the lily has also been depicted on newer Israeli coins, the shekels, as a design of ancient Israel preserving that tradition. And it's the reason why, again, later on, kings would incorporate the lily, Christian kings, because they were seen as, or they wanted to see themselves as connected to David and to Solomon. So the fleur de lis, was used by the French kings was based on this idea of, if you ever wondered why the lily would make its appearance in coats of arms and in designs of the kings, it's because of this, because it was incorporated into Solomon and David's style. Yeah, it's there. It's from the Bible.
Their logo.
Yeah, and it's also, it's not just in the descriptions of the construction. We of course have the beautiful Song of Solomon, or the Song of Songs, that describes the era of Shoshanim, right? The night of the lilies. It's also used in the poetry and the music of Solomon and David. So that's why we have lilies, and why other people had the lily design too. So these are two of the designs that we would see in Solomon's house.
He set up the columns at the portico of the great hall. He set up one column on the right and named it Yachin, and he set up the other column on the left and named it Boaz. Upon the top of the columns, there was a lily design. Thus, the work of the columns was completed.
Yeah, and you can see that the columns were a major source of pride and opulence here in the temple, in the portico of the palace.
Then he made the tank of cast metal, 10 cubits across from brim to brim, completely round. It was 5 cubits high and measured 30 cubits in circumference. There were gourds below the brim, completely encircling it, 10 to a cubit, encircling the tank. The gourds were in 2 rows, cast in one piece with it. It stood upon 12 oxen, 3 facing north, 3 facing west, 3 facing south, and 3 facing east, with the tank resting upon them. Their haunches were all turned inward. So now they're saying there were 2 tanks, one in the temple and one in the palace?
Well, that's an interesting thing, because right here, from right here on, it seems like we've gone back to the temple, right?
Yeah.
So this is actually, this is a description of the temple. So
okay, so we've gone back to the temple.
We've gone back to.
We have this fantastic construction.
Yeah, which again, to show this one, to show this one, we're talking about
those bronze columns.
Those bronze columns. And this is
and that's the tank.
The basin. Yeah. So this is the great tank.
And that basin is very similar to the one time I was in a Mormon temple. It's very similar to where they do their dipping.
Yes.
It looks.
What did they use the tank for?
For baptism.
No, I mean not the Mormons.
What did we use it for?
What did we use it for?
So we used it for, well, there's a real question whether the big tank ever could be used, because
I mean, it doesn't look very practical. You need a ladder to get up there, and I don't see one.
Which is why we have these other great tanks that are over here.
Maybe it had a faucet at the bottom.
So did they use this to move water into these other tanks, or as a more of a symbolic kind of thing?
You wouldn't be able to see the water.
Exactly. You couldn't even get into the water unless, again,
and keeping it clean, my God, it would stink.
kept putting, but let's assume that one of the things that they did was,
and mosquitoes, they
would drain it and put in new water. And this was definitely more symbolic, because again, this is a great,
It's a display of wealth.
Yeah.
In the arid country.
Yeah. So this is, but you can see again, this is not made out of gold. This is made out of bronze,
Mm-hmm.
which makes sense given the fact that
it would be too weak and too.
Yeah, it would collapse on itself. It was
would collapse.
So this is definitely more of a symbolic type thing. But did people actually fill it with water? Probably. And I mean, they didn't fill it all the way, but the weight of this would just be immense. I mean, the weight of this much water, the dimensions would just create
Maybe it had a false bottom.
No, but
that would work though. So
yeah,
that it would look like it was steeper than it
was filled, or that it went into the
and some kind of hydraulics in it.
No, if it went into the things below, right? If it went into the bowls below, but 10 cubits, 15 cubits, 15 feet wide, the diameter, and 5 cubits high, which is about 7.5 feet. If you did this, if you created this kind of tub, I mean, it would weigh, I think, what is it?
A pint's a pound.
Yeah. So you're talking about tons of water. I mean, like literally, you can imagine how much your swimming pool would weigh if it was sitting in a, or not even didn't even have to be your swimming pool, your jacuzzi, your hot tub. So it's a tremendous weight. And again, just the logistics of creating something that would not blow out on its side would be pretty hard to do. So again, maybe they had the technology that allowed them to put some bands around it inside or outside. But yeah, it would be, the physics of it are pretty tough. So you can see that it was on these oxen, and
it was a handbreadth thick, and its brim was made like out of a cup, like the petals of a lily. Its capacity was 2,000 baht.
So that's the translation of or the conversion of this. Now, a bath in Hebrew, right? That is a I'll tell you what the weight is. It is a let's see. Hold it 1 second. You would have so one bath equals 6 hin, but
well, that helps.
you have to know what a hin is. No, but the hin is the other liquid measurement. But so 2,000 baths is 11,000, almost 12,000 gallons. So does everybody get that? That's 12,000 gallons. So how much would that weigh? I will tell you right now. It's a lot of money, a lot of weight. I mean, so a gallon of water weighs, how much does a gallon of water weigh?
8 pounds, I think.
7 or 8 pounds, right?
Yeah. So that'd be like 96,000 pounds. I flunked math in 4th grade, don't trust me.
It's nothing, I'll tell you. So it's, yeah, it's 8 pounds. You were right on 8. So so 8 pounds, if it's 12,000, that's 96. Yeah, it's 96,000 96,000 pounds. Right?
Right.
That's really that's very, very heavy. That would be 48 tons.
48 tons.
48 tons of water. It's tremendous. I mean, like, just in your jacuzzi, in pounds, if you had your jacuzzi would weigh about 3,000 pounds. Would weigh about 3,000 pounds if it was 7x7 hot tub. Okay, so it would weigh about 3,000 pounds of water. That'd be just the water weight, not the weight of the bowl itself, but the water weight would be about 3,000 pounds of water in your jacuzzi. So if you can imagine 96,000, right? That's 32 jacuzzis in that.
It's more like an Olympic-sized pool.
Yeah, but I mean, just to give you an example of like what you would, like what kind of weight you'd be looking at, because again, it's fit. You see how deep it is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it says how you see the depth is you know, the depth is 5 cubits. I mean, that's 7 feet. That is about the depth of an Olympic size pool. I mean, that's the depth of the pool. But again, it's an enormous amount of water. It's enormous amount of weight. And again, to have something that would weigh 5 tons of water, you know, in something would crack. I mean, it just the weight on that on the sides would just make it kind of not. It would be very hard to do. But just to kind of give you an idea of what we're talking about as far as how much water is in there. Interestingly, if we thought about a bath by the biblical weight, about 2,000 baths going into that, it's not that much different than a jacuzzi if you think about it, a bath. Mm-hmm. It's about twice as big as your jacuzzi. So this would be probably about the size again of a mikveh. That's what it's called in Hebrew. It's called a bat. That's a bath. I mean, that's the transliteration of it. There you go. Does the English word bath come from the Hebrew? I never thought of that. I don't know.
It comes from German, though.
I would think so, right?
I mean, the German word is bad.
Is bad, yeah. I would have thought. But in Hebrew, the word bath is, I guess the question is, the German word come from the Hebrew? But this was a measurement of liquid weight, or of liquid capacity. Yeah. All right.
He made the 10 laver stands of bronze. The length of each laver stand was 4 cubits, and the width 4 cubits, and the height was 3 cubits. The structure of the laver stands was as follows. They had insets, and there were insets within the frames. And on the insets within the frames were lions, oxen, and cherubim. Above the frames was a stand, and both above and below the lions and the oxen were spirals of hammered metal. Each laver stand had 4 bronze wheels and 2 bronze axle trees. Its 4 legs had brackets. The brackets were under the laver, cast with spirals beyond each. Its funnel within the crown rose a cubit above it. This funnel was round in the fashion of a stand, a cubit and a half in diameter. On the funnel, too, there were carvings, but the insets were square, not round. And below the insets were the 4 wheels. The axle trees of the wheels were fixed in the lever stand, and the height of each wheel was a cubit and a half. The structure of the wheels was like the structure of chariot wheels, and their axle trees, their rims, their spokes, and their hubs were all of cast metal. 4 brackets round to the 4 corners of each lever stand. The brackets were of a piece with the lever stand. At the top of the lever stand was a round band half a cubit high, and together with the top of the lever stand, its sides and its insets were of one piece with it. On its surface, on its sides, and on its insets, Hiram engraved cherubim, lions, and palms, as the clear space on each allowed, with spirals round about. It was after this manner that he made the 10 lever stands, all of them cast alike, of the same measure and the same form. Then he made 10 bronze levers, 1 lever on each of the 10 lever stands, each lever measuring 4 cubits, and each lever containing 40 bath.
So these are the, well, we'll look at them in a second.
He disposed the lever stands, 5 at the right side of the house and 5 at its left side, and the tank he placed on the right side of the house at the southeast corner.
Oh yeah, let's just look at the, let's go back before we continue on. He says one thing more about
Excuse me a moment.
It's been so well too. Hello.
No worries. So here, while Rosemary's gone for a sec, these are the 5 laver stands that you have on each of the sides, and that's why they only show 5 here, because there'd be 5 over here. You can kind of see this one peeking out of that side, but there would have been 5 on these different sides. You can see here the designs, the wheels, the sides were ornamented, and you had the bowl within the cart, if you will. Now these, as you can see, are much smaller than this. It's 1/40th the size. 1/50th, what was it? 1/50th or 1/40th? It was, each of those were 40 baths. So instead of those were 2,000, that one was 2,000 baths, the main one. And so these are 1/50th the size of this. 50 of these can go into there, basically. As he says, that's 2,000, and then this is, and these are 40. So these are definitely movable, still very heavy. These are still they're still very heavy. But
They've been drawn by animals or pushed by people?
Well, these look like they're, were probably pushed by people. The problem is, if the wheels don't swivel, they'd be
they'd be hard to steer.
Exactly. So, look, part of the reason for keeping them on different sides was probably for this issue of they were not super movable, but they were movable. I mean, they were able to be moved, or again, maybe they were meant to look like they were being able to be moved, but they would have been very, very heavy. And you could also move them when they're not filled with water, right? Take out the water, and then you can, and if you're wondering, how would they drain them? They could use hydraulics. they understood about how to siphon something off, so they could have created a vacuum and then, got the water out. But they still would have been very heavy just in the bronze work, just for the size of what they were. So these are, about the size of a person, almost lengthwise, or widthwise. So they're quite big, and this gives you an idea of how they were in proportion to a person. I mean, here you see a person, and there you see, if something's 5 cubits high, it's longer than a person. But
it looks like they've drawn in there's like a faucet there where those two oxen are protruding from the sides of the tank, and the guy is coming up with a water with a pitcher. So it looks like he's about to like fill that pitcher. Maybe that oxen there is a tap of some kind.
Here?
Yeah, see that? No, up there. This is on the side of the tank. See, so maybe that's where you get the water out.
From the
tank. Yeah. So he's coming up to fill this little
yeah. It could. Now again, it doesn't
that
say
seems like to be the artist's idea there.
It doesn't say anything about ladders or how they got in and out of it, but
right.
Obviously they would have had to.
They had some way of getting the water in and out.
But again, I honestly, and they have bands going around this, but I just don't know how, or it's maybe not even bands, it's the design, but it's one of those things where how it actually functioned, how it actually was used is an interesting
Have we found like anything remotely similar in other ancient temples?
Not of these dimensions, but lavers and bowls, absolutely. We've almost always, that's one of the things we find is that if you have fire, you better have water nearby.
That makes sense.
Here's the altar, and here's
right.
the laver. And so water was used for purification, but most likely too that if it was needed an emergency, they could use water. If some guy's robes got caught on fire, they needed to have water nearby. So almost always, if you have fire, you got water nearby. But it's also, of course, used for purification. It's not just used to put out a fire, but it's smart. It's smart to have water nearby. You got this much fire, and we haven't even got to the other fire yet. We're going to see some other fire.
The bronze columns, they wouldn't have stayed bronzy. They'd have gone green, wouldn't they?
Yes. So it's interesting how people kept bronze from getting discolored, right? Oxidization.
But you have to get out there and polish it.
So what's interesting, of course, is that depending on the levels of iron in it, you can actually reduce the oxidization by having less of a copper content to it. So it could be that, again, they used, they kind of tweaked the copper a little bit so that it had less copper, but yeah, it's a problem because to get that gold bronze effect, you almost have to have enough copper in it so that it'll have that luster, that color. But yeah, then you have the problem of the oxidization. So yeah, it would have been very, very hard not to keep this stuff polished. You can imagine if you have a column that's 40 feet high, to have to polish that would have required a lot of work. But there were a lot of priests, there were a lot of Levites. So it could be that, again, that was a guy's job.
Something they used to keep the priests busy, I guess.
Probably not the highest level job people had but polishing this stuff was probably there. Again, one of the good things about gold is it doesn't require as much polishing as silver and copper and bronze do. But yeah, you can imagine that this would have been that this would have been a problem for the temple, is keeping all this stuff nice and shiny, not looking like it was disrespectfully oxidizing. Right. So there's other stuff, other fire though that we're going to have in this, which we'll get to today.
Hiram also made the lavers, the scrapers, and the sprinkling bowls. So Hiram finished all the work that he had been doing for King Solomon on the house of the Lord, the 2 columns, the 2 globes of the capitals upon the columns, and the 2 pieces of network to cover the 2 globes of the capitals upon the columns. The 400 pomegranates for the 2 pieces of network, 2 rows of pomegranates for each network to cover the 2 globes of the capitals upon the columns. The 10 stands and the 10 lavers upon the stands, the 1 tank with the 12 oxen underneath the tank, the pails, the scrapers, and the sprinkling bowls. All those vessels in the house of the Lord that Hiram made for King Solomon were of burnished bronze.
And again, that's the word, nachoshet memorad. That is burnished bronze. And again, I think there's this understanding too that somehow, again, in it being burnished, it maybe had a color or had a luster that allowed it to maybe not need as much
lacquered. Did they have that? Maybe.
I don't think it was lacquered, but I do think that there was some type of burning that went into it so that maybe it didn't show up, the oxidization as much as it would have normally. But the color of it maybe intentionally made the color of it so that it wouldn't show up. It wouldn't turn green. It wouldn't turn, it wouldn't turn that kind of that ugly rust that you or oxidization that you get from on that. So so you can see again a accounting of all the work that Hiram did.
The king had them cast in earthen molds in the plain of the Jordan between Sukkot and Zaratan. Solomon left all the vessels unweighed because of their very great quantity. The weight of the bronze was not reckoned.
Yeah, we don't even know. We can't even give you an accounting of it because there was so much of it that we don't even know. So it says where they made them. They made them out in the desert, out in the plains of the Jordan, out by the Dead Sea. And most likely
they had so much they didn't even care if somebody was pilfering it.
They don't have, or
else it was considered too sacred to steal.
Yep.
You might think it was
and you can see
pretty sinful to steal something that was meant for the temple.
For the temple, yeah. You can see that they actually made they actually used, they actually carved into the earth the molds that they would make these metal things out of because they were so massive. And it's kind of a testament to the handiwork that they even, the way they even had to make the molds for this. But again, so much stuff that it couldn't even weigh it, especially when it came to bronze. Now, again, bronze wasn't as expensive as gold, but it was still it was still a testament to his wealth that he could have this. We're going to get to where he got this bronze from, actually, in the Bible. It's actually going to tell us that he had copper mines, and we even know where those copper mines are. They're down by Eilat. So this was one of the few metals they actually did have in Israel. They actually had copper there. So again, maybe one of the reasons why it wasn't as big of a deal is because it actually didn't have to be imported. So.
And Solomon made all the furnishings that were in the house of the Lord, the altar of gold, the table for the bread of display of gold, the lampstands, 5 on the right side and 5 on the left, in front of the shrine of solid gold, and the petals, lamps, and tongs of gold, the basins, snuffers, sprinkling bowls, ladles, and fire pans of solid gold, and the hinge sockets for the doors of the innermost part of the house, the Holy of Holies, and for the doors of the great hall of the house of gold.
So this is the other fire that we had there. We had the menorah and the menorahs, actually, because it says that there were 5 on the right side and 5 on the left. So normally we think about the one menorah that was in the tabernacle. Well, the temple, and that's why we saw it in the, I was going to go back and show you again. Well, actually, I will show you. I'll show you not the video, but I'll show you the, I'll show you this. There you got the menorahs right there. We got 5 menorahs on that side, and we would have had 5 on this side. They didn't show them to you, but that's the cross section here. And here you have the lechem panim. You have the temple for the showbread. And here you have the altar here too. This is the inner altar, right? This is the special altar inside the temple. There's also the great altar out here, which is a massive altar. So that you have, that's made out of stone or covered in, and here you have an altar of gold. So this is the other, well, I said you need to have water nearby. This is your lampstands and another altar. So you can see there was not just the big altar that had a lot of fire going on, but also the fire inside. So again, all the stuff that inside was going, that was being used, the bowls, the ladles, the fire pans, all those things that were used for incense, for offerings, inside, all of those things inside the house were made out of gold.
When all the work that King Solomon had done in the house of the Lord was completed, Solomon brought this in the sacred donations of his father David, the silver, the gold, and the vessels, and deposited them in the treasury of the house of the Lord.
Now, what's interesting about this is that he takes all of his stuff, he takes all of his father's stuff in, and he puts the stuff that his dad had made into the temple, but he doesn't put them out. He puts them in the treasury, which means that there was a part of the temple, and we know that this existed in the temple, places where stuff that was placed that they didn't necessarily use, but had been at one point used. They had been sacred things. They had been devoted and donated to God, but weren't out for daily use or weren't even out to be seen. So what's interesting about it, it says what he does with his father's stuff is that he doesn't, melt it down. He doesn't sell it. He doesn't treat it with disrespect, but he doesn't exactly put it out to be used, which I find interesting because on one hand, you think, I want to show this continuity by having this stuff that my father used around the tabernacle before the temple was there. But it's almost as if he's saying this is a fresh start. Everything that we're using is stuff that I made, and it was made for this purpose. It wasn't made for the tabernacle. It was made for the temple. And what I'm using now is going to be the house of Solomon. It's the house of God, but it's also the house of Solomon. It's King Solomon's construction. And he's putting his stamp on everything, including the donations and the sacred things that his father had. So,
is there ever any discussion of Solomon's particular pride in the temple?
It's interesting you say that, because there's two tendencies when it comes to the Midrash on Solomon. The Bible doesn't really give any, there's no judgment here on that. But there's two tendencies here. One is that it had to have a fresh start because Solomon is building this kind of with God's permission and under like the new authority to make sure that nothing from the old ways was there. Where does that even come from? Well, the fact that maybe there was stuff floating around that shouldn't have been floating around. And we know that some of it was. And the weird thing is that we know about that because the Bible tells us that. It's not in a midrash. Remember, we learned later on that people were worshiping Moses' staff that was curing people of snake bites. And that happened up to King Hezekiah's time. So that's happening for another few hundred years, which means that there was stuff that was there that was part of the, there was things that were there predating Solomon, predating David even, that were maybe problematic. They were there. The Bible tells us that they were there. But there's also this understanding that, like, shouldn't there have been stuff from there? And we know that there was stuff from there because it says the ark was there. So there's this almost this kind of like two different things that are competing here, which is one, that there's a continuity to stuff like the ark, but that there's also this fresh start that none of the pagan stuff should be brought in. So there are two competing themes that go on in the Midrash that the Torah doesn't really answer. The Torah doesn't really give us a definitive answer on how much old stuff was in the temple. But I do think it's important that the Bible recognizes there was stuff that was predated Solomon that was in the temple, and that some of that was of value, some of that was important, was special. So it's a question of, like, you know, what when somebody builds something, a house even, or you know, when somebody creates on a national level things, there's one sense of like having continuity and have something like in the ancient world, like the cathedrals that we're talking about, they were built around relics, right? Somebody had, you know, somebody's finger or somebody's, you know, I mean, somebody's art. They had a piece of something, a true cross. They had some piece of something that would be in the cathedral that was like a testament to the old times, right? But at the same time, there was this idea that we want to make something new and something that's never been done before. So there's we still have those competing themes, if you will, in the way we do things, which is, you know, and I would say even in our own homes, you know, we want to have fresh new things in our homes that, you know, are just ours, that brand new. You know, look at my new whatever, you know, my new bathroom or my new whatever. But on the same time, you know, we like to have the candlesticks that were our grandmother's candlesticks, you know. So we do that on a personal level too. But I think it was interesting that Solomon didn't make his father's stuff, at least, the centerpiece of his stuff. You know, he didn't throw it away, but he didn't exactly put it out for everybody to see. It says he deposited them in the treasury. And when
but he was told, you know, David couldn't build the temple because he was a warmonger.
I know, but
you have to.
It would be one thing if he had David's, you know, David had I mean, it says that there was stuff that David had for the temple that were sacred donations. These weren't David's private, you know, it wasn't his private throne that we're talking about, or his private cups. These are sacred things that he dedicated to God that essentially are put away in storage. So he didn't spurn them. He doesn't put them out. I don't know what you can say about this other than I get it. I understand where he's coming from, but it is interesting that David's stuff is not out. It's not out front, not front and center. So everything's done. The work is done. Inside, outside, everything's done. This is actually a good place to leave. But I want to read this at least this first line here of chapter 8.
Then Solomon convoked the elders of Israel, all the heads of the tribes and the ancestral chieftains of the Israelites, before King Solomon in Jerusalem, to bring up the ark of the covenant of the Lord from the city of David, that is Zion. All the men of Israel gathered before King Solomon at the feast in the month of Ethanim, that is the 7th month. When all the elders of Israel had come, the priests lifted the ark and carried up the ark of the Lord. Then the priests and the Levites brought the tent of meeting and all the holy vessels that were in the tent. Meanwhile,
hold it a second. So before we get to the sacrifice, this is the key part of what the continuity is, which is we bring up, and this is why I wanted to at least read this part so you could see that, well, you saw it in the pictures, but we didn't read it. And I wanted you to see it. This is the continuity, is the ark. And it, by the way, it says that there were holy vessels that were in the tent that were still being used. And actually, this is where we'll leave off. So bringing the ark into the temple was what makes it the temple. So for all the things that Solomon had done to make this temple unique and to make it his and to make it new, it had to have the ark. And this is what happens. There's this celebration, this ceremony where the tribal heads, the elders, they bring the ark from the city of David, which is in Jerusalem, but it's not in the temple. It's outside. The city of David is different from the temple area, right? So it's clear that the city of David is not the temple. Okay? They brought it up from the city of David, the part of Jerusalem that David first settled in. Ir David, we've excavated it. We're excavating it. It's not fully excavated, but we're excavating it right now. They bring it up, the ark from there, and they bring it to the Temple Mount. So how many feet is it? I mean, how many yards away is that? Half a mile, quarter of a mile, probably. It's not far, but it isn't the same. They're not the same. Zion is not where the temple, it's not the same spot. Why? Because it says that he brought it from there. So not far. I don't want to make it seem like it's not far at all. Down the road, but it was moved. I mean, there is a procession. There is a moment where that comes to that place. Goes from one place in Jerusalem to the other place in Jerusalem. As we said before, pointed out, the month of Ziv has been pointed out, the month of Bul at Tanim, all these months that you never ever heard of. Why? Because these are the biblical names for the months. They're not the Hebrew names that we use today. Why do I say that's funny? Because they're the Babylonian names for the months. The months that we call Tammuz, which we're just entering into, the month of Av, the month of Elul, these are Babylonian names for our months. They've been Jewish names, Hebrew names for the months for 2,400 years, but they were not the original names for the months. There were Hebrew names that go back to the Bible that pre-existed the Babylonian names. I only point that out because we don't even talk about that. But when people say, "Hey, I know when January is, but I don't know when Tevet is," okay. I mean, they're not exactly the same. Obviously, they don't overlap exact, But the idea that Jews had different months and called them by different names is interesting, because it's actually happens in the Bible itself. The transition to the Babylonian style happens by the end of the biblical period. We're in those months. We have those names appear in the Bible. So the Bible preserves two sets of names for the months: the ancient biblical names, ancient Hebrew names, and also the Babylonian names. So we will pick up not next week and not the week after. Okay, we are off. Actually, the month of July, I am gone, out of town. And the issue is, I get back on Tuesday now from Israel. Originally, I was supposed to come back on Monday. I'm getting back on Tuesday because I'm going to the Maccabeah games, which are actually Monday night in Israel. And because I'm now leaving Monday at 4:50 in the morning from Israel, I will be back Tuesday, but not until after class. So I'm actually leaving, whatever, not to be confusing, I am leaving Monday night from Israel, but I don't get back until about 1 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon. And I'm flying.
Your birthday, right, Rabbi?
It is actually my birthday. That's right. I'm on a plane. I get to be on a plane at 4:50 in the morning on my birthday. But
maybe they'll let you fly it.
Ooh.
like I was a 5-year-old. They'll give me a little.
They'll give you a little wing.
Yeah.
Little junior flight.
Can you imagine that? My wife says to the pilot, we have a birthday. He's 54. He's 54. He wants to fly in the cockpit. He wants to sit in the cockpit. They'd arrest me. I'd be so quick. That's a great image, though. That'd be a great.
What a story you'd have.
Great Saturday Night Live skit. Or or my wife goes in and says, "I have a birthday boy here that like to sit in the cockpit." I go in. No, it's I'm not even flying El Al. I'm flying Lufthansa. So
really?
We changed planes. Yeah, we changed planes in Munich, which is ironic, but it's a very good airline. And right now,
it's a great airline.
Right now, the main key is just to find an airline that will actually get you to the place that everybody I know right now is having travel problems. And some people say it's really bad nationally. It is, but it's also bad internationally. I just talked to somebody who was caught in London for 2 days. Somebody else who got caught in Vancouver coming back on a. I mean, it's not just America. Let me tell you, it is at least as bad, if not worse, in Europe right now. And I will just tell you this: anybody who's flying, anybody who's thinking of flying, anybody who's booking a flight internationally, do use the same airline for both. Don't get cute and book one airline for one and one for the one and another, because those people are the ones that are. It's almost a 50-50 shot that something's going to get delayed, and the other airline has no responsibility for that. They do not care if the other airline got screwed up. I learned that the hard way in South Africa a few years ago, but it's right now it's on a massive scale. So don't be smart and try to save a few dollars by booking on two different airlines, connecting flights, do not do that. The only way to protect yourself is to have the airline be responsible for both legs. Mm-hmm. And otherwise, so for people that were looking to come to Israel with us or going anywhere where you're going, please travel with that in mind right now, because it is a complete mess out there. And in the meantime, we will be tomorrow. We'll have class tomorrow night, but then we'll be off for the next few weeks. But we will be back at the beginning of August. So
will you be back Wednesday, 27th?
Well, it's interesting because I'm not sure yet. I think my family, I'm not positive, but I think my family is planning my birthday stuff for that day because they're not going to see me on the 26th. So we'll see. Okay. We're going to see what happens on the 27th.
Where are you today, Rabbi?
I'm in your backyard. Are
you? You don't look like you're home.
I'm not. I'm not in Santa Clarita. I'll talk to you offline, but but I will tell you this, folks. We will have class tomorrow night. We're working on the summer schedule for August on some other stuff that we're planning on doing. And again, I hope everyone stays well over the break, over my break, over our break. And thank you again, Rosemary. Please stay healthy, Rosemary.
I'm doing my best.
We need you to read for us in a few weeks, but everybody stay well, and thanks for being here. Take care, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Bye.